Hey everyone, I'm Eric. Welcome back to another episode of the SDR Game Podcast. Today my guest is Dyanna Daryadel, Senior Enterprise SDR at Cognizant. Dyanna, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Elric. Really happy to be here.
Yeah, super excited to have you. So obviously, Brad recommended you to be on the show. So I'm super excited to do an episode focused on you because it will be super interesting to also have your perspective as a top SDR at Cognizant. So before we start, can you explain to the audience what you do at Cognizant, and are you focusing on a specific segment or a specific industry?
Yeah, I'm a Senior Enterprise SDR here at Cognizant, so I'm doing like all the outbound cold calling, prospecting into different markets. There's not really a specific market that I'm focused on. It's essentially like anyone who would be a good fit for Cognizant. So I'm prospecting 500 plus company from 500 employee plus companies. So yeah, just essentially my day is packed with a lot of cold calling and LinkedIn prospecting, all of that. So yeah.
When you say what's a good fit company for you?
Yeah, so a good fit company would be anyone that has like SDRs that are focusing on an outbound approach, but also like marketing as well, companies that are sending out campaigns, etc. So essentially, here at Cognizant, like we provide the contact data for that, so mobiles and emails, in order to like fuel that outbound process and those campaigns, essentially.
And well, you already started to talk about that, but what are the main buyer personas you are talking with on a daily basis?
Yeah, so I'm talking with marketing and sales personas, which is a blessing and a curse because, when you call them and you want to run a discovery, they know exactly what you're doing. So they'll either shut you down or they'll be receptive to speaking with you. But yeah, it's mainly just those sales, marketing ops, sales ops is the personas that we target.
What's your quota as a senior enterprise SDR? Your monthly quota?
Every month, we need to hit 10 meetings. But then we also have recently introduced a revenue target, which is 125K per quarter.
Per
So
quarter? Okay.
so we also need to essentially work towards that. But yeah, those are the targets.
What's your KPIs? I remember Brad was mentioning 100 touch points per day. Is it the same for you?
There's not like really any. Yeah, like I think when you start off, like when I first started, it was always like encouraging us to do as many touch points as possible because they want you to get used to the process. But I think every SDR is different. Like, thankfully, shout out to the Cognizant managers. We don't have like managers that are like constantly on your case. Like, you need to do 100 touch points a day. Essentially, like if you are hitting your numbers and your quota and your targets, it's basically it's not like a must to do 100 touch points per day, but that is what is recommended to essentially get to your target, basically.
And which just makes sense. When you start, you need to have like a baseline, a minimum of activities to get some results. So, but yeah, which is good. Really like this approach of giving the freedom to the SDR to do what they prefer to do. So on the activities, because someone could be really good on the quality and they can do maybe less activities. So yeah, let's talk about, for example, your activities. You mentioned when we were preparing the episode that you are really focusing on the phone. How many calls can you make per day? And yeah, let's start with that.
Yeah, I think every day for me is a bit different. Like, I can make like 100 calls a day. I'll have days where I make 100 calls a day, some days where I make 50, but I try to keep myself as like accountable for minimum 50 calls a day. I think with enterprise you have to be a little bit more focused. It's not more so about like pushing out a lot of quantity, but also like focusing your efforts in certain places, like if you've been referred, etc. So yeah, it really varies. It depends, but yeah, I think I try to keep myself to a minimum of 50 calls per day, because I think that's like it is really important in terms of pipeline, etc. So yeah.
What's your connect rate?
It varies. I think I'd say around 15 to 20% is like the average connect rate I have. Sometimes it's more, right? It depends when people are interested in picking up the phone.
So you were starting to talk about that your days, sometimes you are doing minimum of 50 calls, sometimes you are doing 100 calls. What was interesting when we were preparing this episode, you mentioned that you don't have a daily schedule, so it's all depends around your day. So what's your approach on your time management?
With my time management, obviously, I think I'm really good at focusing. Like, I come into work and I'm just like, okay, I need to focus. Like, I'll go into my little space. We have these little booths here that I'm in right now, and I'll just really try to like maximize my time. And then when it's lunchtime, I'll go free and speak to my colleagues. But I think in terms of structuring my day, it depends, right? So if I come in and sometimes if I've spent like 1 week having loads of conversations, I'll come in the next day and I'll have loads of emails in my inbox, right? So I'll prioritize responding to those. And then really as soon as it hits like once I've done like added a few more people to like my sequences and stuff, it's really about just like hitting the phones and like making as many calls as possible. Then I'll do that till like 12 p.m., so lunchtime. After lunch, I'll come back at 1. And as I'm also making calls and having conversations, I have like a little notebook here. So if I've had a conversation with someone that like seems promising, or if they're going to introduce me to someone else, I'll just always make a note. I won't do my emails as I'm calling, if that makes sense. So after I've had all those conversations, I'll come back at lunch, have a list of people I need to email. I'll email them. And then again, I'll get back on the phones. And essentially, if it's people that I've called already, and maybe they've not picked up again or whatever, I'll then like send them an email. We use Outreach, so it's quite easy with the whole sequencing thing. And then again, I come back onto calling if there's like any tasks I need to pick up. Another thing I also do is when I have conversations with people and say they've picked up the phone, but they've not been interested in talking and they've been a bit short, I just put like a little note in my calendar to like call them again in like 2 days or something. So I have like allocated an hour to basically following up on people that I've already spoken to as well.
When you say the beginning, you are in focus mode at when you start your day. So it means, are you going to a booth like this and you are staying 4 hours inside the booth and not talking to anyone, or what do you?
I think I'm really famous amongst my colleagues about going to the booth. It's something that's always a little bit controversial. Like for me, I just focus really well by myself. Like luckily enough, again, our managers aren't very like, strict on whatever, like you need to be in the sales floor or whatever. But I think it depends, right? Sometimes when I'm feeling a bit lonely, then I'll go back onto the sales floor and do what I need to do, and then I'll come back into the booth. But I think with this job, especially like at the beginning of the month, you're back to zero. So you need to just switch on your focus again. So it's very much that anxiety kicks in and I'm like, okay, I need to do my calls. I need to do my emails. So I come in the booth, but I switch it, right? Sometimes I go out. Sometimes if I'm feeling comfortable and I have enough pipeline, I'll go out and I'll sit there and I'll do my work. But when I'm a bit more stressed, I probably just come into the booth.
About your activities, you said you do between 50 calls and 100 calls. Do you have like this number because you're working with your win rate, not your win rate, but your connect rate and your booking rate. So that's why you came up with this number?
I don't really know. I've not really thought of like the mathematics side of it, but yeah, you're right. I guess from like being in the role, like as months went on, I got a better understanding of how many steps I need or how many calls I need to essentially hit my target every month. So it is more or less that, right? Like, for example, last month, December, December, everyone knows it's a bit of a difficult month. It was my first month as an SDR in December, so I knew that in the first 2 weeks of December, I need to do more calls because I need to cram that all into 2 weeks, for example. So yeah, I think it's just analyzing like your own process and like tweaking it when needed.
And when you say at the beginning of December you made more calls, how many calls did you make during those 2 weeks?
In December,
Yeah.
God, I think there were days where I did like 120 calls. Yeah, and just to, especially in December, that no one can be like really bothered to come in because they've got so much stuff to do. So I knew I had to have more conversations in order to get more people in, essentially.
Earlier, when you were talking about when you come back after lunch, after your first session of focus mode during your days, you have your notes. Do you call once a person? I'm sorry. Can you call twice or 3 times a person in one day, or you call a person once during a day? Or what's your approach?
Yeah, so that's actually a good question. So in terms of calling people, I try not to call them 3 times because they can get a bit annoyed.
Yeah.
But I do call them twice. So for example, every week I'll have maybe like 20 to 30 new people to call. And I'll have like a list of those people. I know which people they are, right? So the first time I call them maybe like earlier on in the day. Call them once. If they didn't pick up, then I'll call them again like later on in the day at like 4 p.m. Because like my logic for that is when you're calling someone once every day, they're more likely to find out that it's a sales call and then they'll never pick up your call again, right? So, but if you call them twice in a day, they're like, oh, that, that's my logic anyway. They're like, oh, this person called me earlier in the morning. It must be important, and they've called me again. And to their surprise, it's a sales call. But yeah, I just find that that's something that works for me anyway.
No, and you're right. You need to think about that because you don't want to annoy them also, and you don't want to because you know that if they figure out that's a sales call, they're not going to pick up. So that's a good point.
I think 2's a good number. Two's the not annoying number, so that's what I stick to.
When we are preparing the interview, you mentioned that for you, when you're making calls, you don't expect to book a meeting on every call. So how do you approach your call calls? Are you more focused on the conversation, or what do you do on your calls?
One of the first things when I started here at Cognizant, my first ever sales role, is like I was told, whenever you're calling, don't worry. Like if you don't book a meeting, it will still be like a positive outcome. So that's something that I've taken with me. I try not to think too much about when I call someone, oh, this is definitely going to be a meeting, right? I just have a conversation because you can get information from that person. And that's the information that you can use in your next call with someone else, or you can call them again in a month's time and just basically have a more in-depth conversation with them. So I don't necessarily see it as a loss, and I think that's one of the things that really helps me. Also, like in terms of like dealing with the rejection as well, because obviously with an SDR, a lot of rejection comes with the role, and I won't let it get to me because I haven't set that expectation. Oh, I need to book a meeting. Why haven't I booked a meeting? It's still a very positive outcome because I've just gotten information or I've just gotten a referral to someone that is the right person. So I think that's something that really helps me and motivates me to make more calls.
For example, you are talking about you can get some information. For example, if there is someone giving you the information or the name of someone that you should reach out to. So you mentioned that you make a note and then in the afternoon you're calling this person.
Yes, so on the call, it depends, right? You need to read the person. I think sometimes they might just be referring you because it's something that they're not really interested in looking at right now. So you need to understand if who they're referring to you is the right person. So as soon as I'm referred to someone on the phone, I quickly go on LinkedIn and for example, see their job title, see if they're referring me to someone like good, decent enough. And if that is the case, then I'll be like, okay, perfect, thank you. I'll always ask this, it's a bit cheeky, but I'll just be like, is there any way I can send you an email and you can intro me to that person? Sometimes they'll say yes, sometimes they'll say no, but it's always worth an ask, right? Like it's always important to ask that. And sometimes it works really well. And if they say no, then obviously I'll go and I'll call them in the afternoon or straight away and just be like, listen, I've just spoken to your colleague, they referred me to you, and just essentially, just have a conversation with them. And it's a lot more warmer and easier to talk to that person that you've been referred to.
The email you mentioned, I think it's really good because if it's coming from them, it will be also easier to start the conversation than you coming and talking about they referred me to you, and because they don't have any proof of that. So
Exactly. Always ask for an
yeah.
intro.
Yeah. How do you structure your calls?
So my intro is always the same. I always like sort of just it's not as fancy as Brad is. Brad is an amazing cold caller, but mine's just basically like, hi Elric, I can see, I was just on your LinkedIn, I can see that you're the sales leader at XYZ. Is now a good time to have a quick conversation? If they say no, I'm just like, can you give me 30 seconds for me to explain what it's about? So my intro is always the same. It seems to have worked for me. And one thing is, like, if something's working for you, I wouldn't change it. Like, so my intros is fine. But I think it depends what they say, right? If they say, that they're using a tool at the moment, I'll ask them how they're finding the tool.
Before we talk about the tools, can we go back on the intro? Just I have a few questions. So you mentioned,
yes.
if they say no, you said, can you give me 30 seconds to explain why I call? And I really like that because generally what SDR do in this case, they say, okay, when I can call you back, and then they call, they say tomorrow, and then they try to call them and they don't pick up.
They don't answer.
Yeah. So they give you 30 seconds. What do you say?
Yeah, and then essentially I just pitch our product. I'm like, so here at Cognism, just like I got your mobile number today, we can provide sales teams with verified mobiles and emails. Just was curious to see if you're using something for that at the moment. And they'll either be like, yes, we're using some tools, and then I'll try to find out like what tools they're using. And essentially the conversation is based on what they tell me. So I think personally, I don't really think of like my cold calls as very structured. It's because it's a conversation, right? You never know what the other person is going to say. When I first started, that was my biggest mistake, is when I first started out in the sales role, is I was thinking too much about the structure and not listening to what the prospect is saying. So I just say something completely irrelevant out of the blue. And then when I had like one-to-ones with my manager said, why are you doing that? And I was like, you know what? I don't know. So that from like that day on, I was like, yeah, I need to just not think about the structure and just have a conversation. So it depends on what they say. And then I take the conversation from there, really.
You're talking a lot about competitors, actually. So do you try to figure out really quickly on your callers what they're currently using on every conversation? Or
in terms of finding out, so one thing I want to say is whenever I have an account, like get a new account, whatever, I always try to do some account-based research, right? So maybe there's been a previous op, so we already have data on like what tools they're using, etc. I like to always do that, and we use Scratchpad, so I always just put the notes like in my Scratchpad to have it in front of me. So I either find out that way what tools they're using, so I go into the conversation prepared. And if I don't know, yes, like, because my first question is, I just want to see if you're using anything for that at the moment. They'll either say a competitor, or it will be more of like an education sell where, they've never come across anything like this before. Their main source of data is LinkedIn. And then that's where you can just like educate and sell, tell a little bit more about the product and what you're doing. So that's I think the main thing is knowing what they're using, right? Because you want to know what you're coming up against.
yeah, exactly. Because if they are already using something, they are more educated on what you can do, and it's more about, hey, I imagine I've never worked for Cognism or another tool like this, but I imagine it's more focused on your strengths, the strengths of your product, and what you can do maybe better than the competitors, or maybe working with the rest of the tool, because I know other companies are using 3 tools at the same time generally for data. And then if you have someone who is not using a tool like Cognizant, generally it's you need, like you said, they don't know that there is a solution for that, and so you need to show them that Cognizant is the solution actually.
Yeah, exactly. And with that kind of thing, I think you have to keep it really basic. That's another thing. I don't use fancy language. I'm not really good at fancy language anyway. So when I cold call, it's not really about like using big words and stuff. Keep it all very basic, just so the other person can understand. And yeah, it's easier that way, in my opinion.
No, which is good. It's a really good point, because generally we try to overthink and try to use words that our prospects or customers are not using, and so that's not good generally, because they won't understand what we are saying. So let's say the person they say they use a competitor of yours. So how do you approach that?
When they say a competitor, obviously I try to find out what sort of pains they're having at the moment, whether that be like the quality of the data, the level of data that they're getting, whether that be their teams aren't hitting target at the moment, and essentially link it back to that. So I try to find out what their issues are with their provider, and the main way I position us is just like essentially like the quality, like we have the most mobiles and emails in comparison to any other provider, and in terms of like accuracy, we have human verified data, so like our teams are like manually checking that the data's correct, so their teams aren't like so that would mean that their teams aren't calling numbers that aren't going to pick up, numbers that aren't going to connect. And also, like another USP that I always like to say is our diamond on demand feature, which I think when I prospected you, Elric, I said that as well, which is essentially just in cases where we don't have data, your teams can request it, and within 48 hours, our teams will bring back a mobile or an email. So those are the things I like to stick to.
I remember because yesterday or 2 days ago, I watched the videos you sent me on LinkedIn. Actually, and you were talking about that, so that's a good point. If their team is struggling, you try to link back to what Cognizant can help with. So, how do you do that? Because, for example, I know if you talk about phone numbers, you can talk about the connect rate. Do you ask questions about the connect rate of their teams, or how do you approach that?
So I think that's really difficult. I think because a lot of the time, especially when you're speaking with like sales leaders and stuff, on the operations side, they're more data driven, so they have those numbers. But if I'm speaking to an SDR manager or a VP of sales, I personally find that if I ask them like, "What's your connect rate at the moment?" Out of 10, how many mobiles are correct? I think sometimes they just switch off because they don't know the answers. They don't know the answers to that. They have to go check it. So I try not to ask questions based on that, right? Again, it depends what you can get out of them. It depends what they say. If they say, "Oh, at the moment, I'm just really focusing on getting my teams to target." Oh, so they're not hitting target at the moment. You just quickly, you pick it up and take it from there, right? Especially, I think now as well, what's more important is with the current economic climate, loads of companies are cutting down on costs. At the moment, loads of inbounds are getting less, so companies are focusing more on like their outbound strategy, right? And that's where Cognizant comes in. Like you want your teams to have mobile numbers, you want your teams to have emails, and the best tool that can do that is going to be the best asset to your team. So, especially now, that's a lot of what the conversations are surrounding.
What's the most common objection you get on the phone?
Most common, I think probably now is budget. You need to figure, but that again, budget could either be like a genuine like reason that they're not going to look at any other tools, or it could just be a brush off, like I don't want to talk to you, budget, we don't have budget. And that's something you need to figure out. I always, whenever they say budget, I try to get a reason out of them.
What do you say, for example? Say, hey, sorry, Dyanna, I don't have any budget.
I'll just be like, okay, cool, no worries at all. I mean, I'd say something like, the initial conversation isn't to get anything signed off straight away. It's just to see if this would be a good fit, or show you the value that we could bring. And I'll just be like, so in terms of budgets, like when are they looking to get renewed or whatever? And then if there's a genuine reason, they'll tell you like, oh, okay, at the moment, I don't know, this is something I had recently, like, uh, at the moment we're going through like a merger, everything's on hold. They'll give you like an actual reason. You just have to find a way to continue the conversation.
And so like this, if you say they're on hold, also you can get the date that they maybe they have a timeline when you can start call them back or something like that.
Exactly. And that's why I like to get a reason, right? Because then you can just put a note on the account and reach out when the time is right. So yeah, always try to get a reason when they say budget. And also, again, if you have a conversation with someone and they say they don't have budget, I don't just like drop the account. I'll still go speak to other people, and if they all tell me budget, then I'm like, okay, fine. That's that.
And that's a really good point, because generally, and here it's more for people selling to sales sales buyer personas, or ops personas, or marketing personas. When I was leading a team at Chili Pepper, I don't have any budget. So I can say, yeah, I don't have budget, but I can work to get budget, and that's different. So earlier you were mentioning before you reach out to an account, you have like maybe a checklist. I would love to talk about how when you pick an account, your process, what you are looking for, or how do you pick an account on your list?
Here at Cognism, sometimes we're given accounts, and sometimes some SDRs like to just like take the initiative and have a look at accounts, like find accounts themselves using like the Cognism Prospector tool or whatever, or even like LinkedIn. In terms of when I look for an account, obviously I'm looking for like SDRs. I'm looking for like just sales teams, and I'm looking for like marketing teams as well. And if I can see that they have like a good amount of that, I'll reach out to them. But obviously I'm not always going to know just by looking at a LinkedIn profile whether an account is a good fit. I just say, okay, I'm going to target this account. I call people and I find out. I qualify them out if they're not a good fit. But yeah, obviously, like if an account has spoken to us previously, then I know from like the opportunity notes, like why it wasn't the right time, whether they are a good fit or not. So I do some sort of research based on that as well.
Do you use something differently also? Because you mentioned that you can see on the opportunity record that you can see the previous notes from maybe the AE or another SDR. Or do you use something else also to get information?
Yeah, so I use Salesforce. So we have Salesforce. I use that to like sort of get the opportunity notes, and also we have like Gong as well. So if I don't see any notes, then I can see previous conversations that my colleagues have had with certain people. So if it's like a good title and it's someone that I want to speak to as well, I'll just quickly listen to the Gong recording, see what they said, and then basically give them a call.
Something also I'm doing also on top of that is checking. Well, for us we are using Salesforce, but if you're using Outreach, it's checking the previous conversations, and if anyone replied to another SDR or another AE. Because on Salesforce it's hard to see the replies, so it's easier to see on the on your tool you're using. And sometimes you can find, for example, you are mentioning that you are looking for which tool they're using. If you can find that on the opportunity record, generally you can find it on the previous conversations.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so now let's talk about some tips. So any tips to share for someone who wants to improve their cold calling skills?
I think the main thing is obviously when you're calling, don't expect a meeting. I think what is it they always say, like separate yourself from the outcome. I think that will really help you. And also another thing with cold calling is that when you call someone, obviously we're all human, right? So when you call someone, they're not in the mood and they might just be a little bit blunt with you, not in the mood to talk. If they're like a good title and you know that something could potentially come out of this, don't be afraid to try again in a couple of days, because I can't tell you the amount of times where I've had a bad conversation with someone, then I've called them again and they've been so like friendly and like come in for like they're like accepted to come in for a meeting and stuff. So don't be afraid to try again. the people that you're calling, they don't know you, so it doesn't matter if you like embarrass yourself or whatever, and I'm sure that you won't, but just like having the confidence to try again after you've been rejected, I think is really important.
And generally what happens also is they don't even remember that they had the conversation 2 or 3 days ago. So.
Exactly.
What's your favorite resource as an SDR? It can be a tool, a podcast, a blog, someone you're following on LinkedIn, or something else.
Obviously, other than Cognism. No, I think my favorite tool is probably Scratchpad. Scratchpad is like, I don't know if you're familiar with it. Yeah. So it's basically really good to just have all your notes in front of you. It's really helpful. You can also see previous notes that maybe your colleagues have put on the account. I think it's really good for when like I organize everything and it's just like really clear to see. And also Gong as well. I think it's really good for training. I had no experience before in sales, so before starting Cognism, and when I started the role, I was like, oh my god, Gong is so good. So I just listened to Gong. I still do listen to Gong calls, and I think it's really helpful in your learning process.
What advice would you give to a smart and driven new enterprise SDR? And what advice should they ignore?
Just don't be afraid. Like just learn as much as you can. I think with this role, like you can learn it, right? If you're motivated to do it and you're driven to do it, you can learn it by just again, listening to calls, watching your peers, seeing how they do it. I think that's really important. And also, like I'm like a senior enterprise SDR now, but I don't stop learning. I still know that I can, always improve. So I'm always getting tips from other people. I'm always listening to other people's calls. I remember I had like a terrible week of like not booking anything. And it was getting to me. I was like, can I cold call anymore? I can't do this. So I just went on Gong and I started listening to my colleagues' like calls, and I was just like listening to how they do it. And I can't tell you how much it helped me, because it opens your eyes to like the objections that they're getting, how they're handling objections. And I told my colleague, I was like, yeah, I was listening to your calls last night. They were like, no way. I was like, yeah. So I think just basically not stopping the learning process, always learning. And what advice should they ignore? I don't know that one. Probably like knowing that like everyone has their own process and not trying to like implement everything at once and getting really overwhelmed with it. I think when you're new, it's really hard to know what's right and wrong. So just being able to filter it all out.
Dyanna, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast today. Is there anything else you would like to share before we end the episode?
All good. I thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I've never done anything like this, so I hope I've done a good job. And I really enjoyed speaking with you. It's nice to have prospected you and now have this chat with you. So it was really good. Thank you very much, Ulrich.
It was nice to see you. And for everybody listening, thank you for listening and thank you for joining us.